and jump in. And as others join us, they'll jump in with us. So hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today during your lunchtime to learn more about the Grassland Conservation Reserve Program, or Grassland CRP. I'm Lane Justice. I'm the Idaho Resources Coordinator for the Western Landowners Alliance, and I'm calling in today from Boise, Idaho. It's sunny and probably about 60 degrees outside. I haven't walked out yet, but that's what temperature I would guess from looking out my window. So I'd love for all those that are attending to put who you're with, who you are, where you're calling in from in the chat. And so we have an idea of who's with us today. A little background on the Western Landowners Alliance. So WLA is a West-wide organization of landowners, natural resource managers, and partners dedicated to keeping working lands whole and healthy for the benefit of both people and wildlife. At WLA, we recognize the economic viability and conservation of quality habitat and working lands go hand in hand. So much of our work is to support, share, and fine-tune the tools and services to support landowners and managers in the conservation and stewardship of private lands. And that said, Grassland CRP is one of the tools that we work with frequently. And so Grassland CRP is a voluntary working lands program managed through FSA that contracts with producers and operators to protect grassland, including rangeland, pastureland, and wildlife habitat, while also maintaining the areas as grazing lands. So emphasis on that last part, the areas are maintained as grazing lands. In return for maintaining the grazing lands according to an NRCS-approved management plan, the FSA pays producers annual rental payments and cost share assistance while allowing livestock producers or livestock production activities to continue. If you've joined these calls before, you've probably seen our in-house Grassland CRP expert, Shalise Harrison, who's our Wyoming Resources Coordinator, so my counterpart in Wyoming. She's currently out on maternity leave, so I've stepped in to fill her shoes to the best of my ability. But acknowledging that I'm not as much of an expert as she is, I'm happy that we have some great panelists, both NRCS and FSA experts, as well as landowners who participate in the program to help answer some of y'all's questions today. So I'm going to do some introductions of our panel members today. First, we have Patrick Lewis, and Patrick works on CRP, the Conservation Reserve Program, and CREP, the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program for the Western states for FSA, and is also the acting Grassland CRP Program Manager. He's been with the agency full-time since 2013 and has worked in several states in the region. He's based out of Eastern Washington State, and his family operates a hay cattle operation near the Canadian border. Next, we have Katrina Thompson. She is the NRCS National CSP, her Conservation Stewardship Program Manager. She has over 34 years of experience as a soil conservationist, district conservationist, and natural resource specialist, as well as program manager with the USDA Soil Conservation Service, SCS, and now the Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS. She has worked across Montana and Pennsylvania and currently works in Washington, D.C. for national headquarters. And she has worked with hundreds of farmers and ranchers to implement conservation across various landscapes. Katrina attended Northern Montana College and received an ag business degree, and then moved on to Montana State University and graduated with a Bachelor of Science in rangeland management. She is married with 2 children, 2 stepchildren, and 4 grandchildren. And currently her favorite pastime is spending time with her grandchildren and golfing. Next, we have Chris Robinson, who's a Wyoming landowner. Chris is the CEO and co-owner of the Ensign Group, which owns, operates, and manages over 1 million acres of private and public lands located in Utah, Idaho, and Wyoming under the Ensign Ranch's name. He has extensive experience in production, agriculture, local government, mineral and resource development, public lands, renewable energy, environmental wildlife conservation values, water resources, and real estate investment and development. He's served on many boards and councils and is married to Rochelle Allen Robinson, who are, between the two of them, are parents of 4 married children. And then finally, we have Matthew Rose Stark, a California producer. Matthew and his wife, Raleigh, own and operate Keystone Land and Livestock, which manages grass-fed, certified organic cattle across over 4,700 acres of grassland, oak savanna, and chaparral in California's Sutter Butte Mountains. They practice adaptive rotational grazing, which produces healthy cattle and resilient, productive, biodiverse rangelands. They work with like-minded cattle producers, local landowners, nonprofits, and government government agencies to care for and improve the land they steward. Last year, they enrolled in the Grassland CRP program and can answer questions about their experience as tenants on the land. And so now I'm going to ask our panelists a series of questions at an endpoint during the webinar. If you have questions that don't get answered, please enter them into the chat, or the Q&A function might be better, or you can hold your questions till the end. I plan to leave us plenty of time at the end after the presentation to address any of the questions that weren't discussed prior. So first, I'm going to turn it over to Patrick, and he's going to give us a high-level overview of the program.
Thanks, Lane. And I was going to say, you know, in 30 seconds, you really did my presentation for me, so we could just skip over all that stuff if you really wanted to. And okay, so as mentioned, we are here talking about Conservation Reserve Program, specifically the grasslands portion of it. This is mostly going to focus on grassland, but I will say that what we're going to talk about applies mostly to all the rest of CRP too. So, you know, don't feel like we can only answer questions on that stuff. So, as mentioned, Grassland CRP is part of the overarching Conservation Reserve Program, which is administered by my agency, the Farm Service Agency. If you've heard of SAFE, the State Acres for Wildlife Enhancement, or CREP, the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, or just general or continuous CRP, those are all, you know, different flavors of the larger program as is. Grassland CRP, as mentioned, is focused on preserving the grassland ecosystem, and it is more working lands focused than our traditional CRP offerings. You know, general CRP, continuous, even in CREP, we don't generally allow ongoing regular ranching actions, whereas Grassland CRP, that's really one of the prime focuses. Sign up will be announced soon. If you remember last year, got to listen to my song and dance as part of this in Wyoming or in other places in the West. You know, our sign up started roughly around this week, ran for a month. We're anticipating a similarly scheduled sign up, you know, here in a couple, announced here soon, should run for about a month, and then we'll run through the rest of it over the course of the year. If you are in that competitive process, you get a bid accepted, you will move on with your offer. That contract will start October 1st, 2024, and then run for the contract list. And then there's just a slight typo on there. It should be sign up 206, which is what we're going to be calling this year. So how grassland fits into the larger landscape of CRP. If you don't know, we have a 27 million acre cap for all flavors of CRP nationwide. That's set by the statute. The 2018 Farm Bill established that. Right now, grassland is the most popular form of CRP. There are more than 8.5 million acres enrolled in grassland throughout the nation. It is available also in certain situations through the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. We have one CREP in Montana that has a grassland component, and then we have 3 tribal CREPs in the state of South Dakota that all focus on the grassland practice. And then it's also reflected in initiatives, wildlife initiatives, and working lands for wildlife. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but you know, the grassland component and what we're trying to get done through grassland is starting to kind of seep out past just the Grassland CRP sign up. Like I mentioned, because of that 27 million acre cap, we have limited acreage available this year. For all of CRP, we have less than 3 million acres. You're probably aware, or if you are not, we just had our general sign up for this year, our general CRP sign up. We haven't announced the results of that yet, and continuous sign up is ongoing. So we're going to be working with less acreage than we have in the past. Just for your knowledge, the last 2 grassland signups 203 and 204 and 205, excuse me, have averaged more than 4 million acres offered each. And in those instances, we took slightly more than half. So if that same thing played out this year, we would have very close to 0 acres left at the end of the fiscal year. And that's going to impact our ability to hold a sign up next year, assuming that, you know, depending on what happens with the Farm Bill and all that good stuff. The eligible participants, so you have to have an interest in the land offered, whether that is an owner of that land, operator, or another tenant, like if you're operating just a portion of that land. That can be individuals and entities. And the payment shares must be agreed to by all parties. So each CRP contract is going to pay based on the acreage offered in the practice and all that good stuff. Those shares do not have to match anything else in the FSA office. They don't even necessarily have to match a lease you might have signed. They just have to be agreed to by the parties, and we stay out of that conversation. So if you haven't worked with us before, or it's been a minute since you've been in your local office, you're going to have to provide a packet of information in order to get going. One of that things is going to be a farm operating plan. This is a loose understanding of the inputs and the outputs of your farm. You know, what land you have, how you are operating it as an individual or an entity, how you're coming up with capital, equipment, labor, management. Those are, again, we don't need exact ideas. It's loose, and it's even less requirements. There are less requirements, excuse me, for CRP than there are for some of our other programs, although this is just part of the deal. So obviously we're going to need your farm tract information. You know, how are you on the land that you are on? Do you own it? Do you lease it? Can we get the lease? You know, can we confirm with the assessor? That sort of thing. You're going to sign a certification that if there's highly erodible land on the farm, you're managing it in a way that we are okay with. And this is going to be less of a problem for Grassland CRP because we're generally talking about established grasses that aren't considered cropland, but it is still a general program requirement. You're also going to have to do an adjusted gross income certification. For this farm bill, that means that you're certifying that in the last 3 tax years, and we're going to talk about this again later, you certify that you had less than $900,000 in average adjusted gross income in those years. That's about as far as I can go without being a tax professional, but I can definitely answer some more questions about that later. And then obviously we're going to want to have a way to pay you. So we try to do direct deposit in every situation. So you're going to provide us that bank information so that every year we can send you what we owe you. So there are some specific requirements to both the owner and the operator. If you're the owner of the ground, you had to have owned it for at least the last 12 months prior to offering that land into CRP, not just Grassland CRP, but CRP. There are some exceptions there. If you are an heir and you got the land because your a family member passed it to you as part of their will, you know, we can work with that. If you acquired the land in the last 12 months for reasons other than just putting it into CRP, we may potentially work with that. And then if the land is expiring CRP, that land is automatically eligible to be placed back into CRP. And again, that's a generally applicable rule, not just a Grassland deal. Same general 12-month requirement if you are an operator trying to qualify the land. And then if you are qualifying the land as the operator, we also need to have satisfactory evidence that you're going to have control through the contract period. So whether that's a long-term lease, documentation provided to your county committee at the local office that convinces them that you're going to be on that ground. One thing I will mention, and I probably will end up repeating myself on the slide, the entity or person that is qualifying the land has to take a share. So if you're the operator and you're qualifying, you cannot take zero. Same story with the owner. And that's just signifying that, you know, the person that is kicking off the process and putting this land into CRP has some skin in the game later on. We do have some other rules, and again, this is Grassland CRP and all CRP, we call it landlord tenant, and that means that when enrolled in CRP, the tenant has to be provided the opportunity to participate. An owner cannot unilaterally preclude that tenant from participating in CRP. And we also don't want to get into situations where right before signup or during signup, a tenant is removed in order for the landowner to take 100% of that contract payment. So we try not to get too far into this, but we do want to preserve the opportunity for tenants that have legitimate aims on legitimate interest in the ground to be able to participate. If a farmer, the tenant, the operator, or another tenant does not want to participate in the contract, and we have a separate form or a written request from them to be excluded from the contract, and we are okay with that. But again, that's something that we get from the tenant aside from this process to, again, just make sure that the tenant was provided that opportunity. Grassland CRP has a couple of very specific land eligibility concerns. So there's going to be a slide that identifies this a little cleaner later, but we have to make sure that grassland has less than 5% tree cover on the acres offered. As we get to, and these are trees, not shrubs. So depending on where you are, I know like in Oregon and Wyoming and where I am in Eastern Washington, we have some shrubs that can dominate or be a problem, and we can address those in the contract as opposed to just trimming that land out. Again, that can be, the land can be expiring CRP, or if you have a Grassland Reserve Program, which is an older program that was aimed at some of the same things that Grassland CRP is, that land is also eligible. Private, state, or tribally owned land is eligible to put into CRP and Grassland CRP. Federally owned land, so not land, not tribal land that's held in trust, but like BLM or Forest Service or something like that. Those federal lands are ineligible to participate in CRP. And if you're familiar with CRP, in general, or in certain situations, in just general, we require what we call cropping history, and that means that out of 4 out of the 6 years set by statute, for this one it's 2012 through 2017, there has to be an annual agricultural commodity, corn, wheat, beans, something like that, planted. For Grassland CRP, there is no cropping history requirement because, again, we're looking at established grass stands. I will also note that FSA's definition of grassland is going to be a lot more open than even NRCS's or maybe some state agencies, or what your group's working definition is. For the most part, land dominated by grass historically is going to be eligible, but if you have specific questions, your local office or I can help try and nail that down. Here is what is probably a very fuzzy looking slide. It looks fuzzy on my screen too. It looked better before. So this is an example of what I'm talking about with the 5% tree cover in the eligible land. So in this entire box, right here, we have a homestead or a corral or a farm series outbuilding. That land is ineligible for enrollment, so it's been drawn out. Here we have an area where there is 5% or more tree cover, so we've drawn that land out because that's not eligible. And in here we have a pond. So acreage underwater permanently is not eligible for sign up. That means that we're looking at potentially, this CLU as what we would want to offer and potentially enroll into Grassland CRP. One thing I will mention that is continuously a concern is what happens if there's an easement on the ground, or what if I want to put an easement on the ground after enrolling into CRP. So let's look at land encumbered prior to enrollment. It may be eligible if the easement does not contain what we call a resource conserving measure. Don't ask me to define that because we didn't do a good job of it. Basically, what that means is if the easement restricts other agricultural uses, I cannot rip up this grass and plant wheat, corn, beans, whatever that is. It's not going to be eligible to put into CRP. If it's just restricting us from going to non-ag uses, like this can't turn into the local Walmart, we're probably going to be okay there. I will mention that, one of the things that Grassland CRP is looking to do is to stop that threat of conversion of these grasslands into other agricultural uses or non-agricultural uses. So if your easement is already doing those things, we're already getting the benefit we would get out of CRP. Now, what happens if we want to put an easement on ground during the CRP contract period? Again, it could be okay. We have to confirm that the folks on the contract are still going to be able to do what the CRP contract is asking them to do. If the easement is going to make them have to run a different animal herd or can't do some certain things that we've talked about in the conservation plan, and we can't modify the conservation plan to match, then we're not going to be able to allow that contract to continue. So the participant would have to choose. And then whoever is providing that easement, let's say it's the Nature Conservancy or even WLA, they have to certify that they knew that this ground was under CRP contract and that they will be able to comply with the CRP provisions. What I will say is in a lot of instances, and we have easements on CRP land all over the place, and we have a lot of agreements like CREP agreements and things like that that work with land that ends up in an easement. Generally, land that then becomes under an easement has a very hard time re-enrolling into CRP. I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm just saying it becomes an issue. And all of these easements end up getting looked at by the local office potentially the state office, more often than not me, to make sure that, you know, we're double encumbering ground that we really should be, or looking at, you know, what our other options might be on some of that other land. So let's talk real quick about cost share. So FSA, it can provide 50% cost share for different actions. Again, that's set by statute. So if you're familiar with NRCS's EQIP, they provide higher cost share and or higher financial assistance amounts than we do through cost share. But through Grassland CRP, we can do permanent internal fence, corrals, you know, to split paddocks, that sort of thing. We can do water infrastructure. We can do fuel breaks, livestock trails and walkways. And then in those states and counties that allow it, you know, I live in a county that does not allow this. So it just depends on your local circumstances. Prescribed burning. And so we will set these things up in the conservation plan that NRCS or the technical service provider creates with the landowner, you know, with the participants. And then generally we want this stuff to be done in the first 3 years. If you're familiar with CRP, that's what we use as our establishment period. And we kind of, you know, follow through that here. Just real quickly on payment limitation, our annual payment limitation for CRP for the annual rental payment is $50,000 for you know, individuals or entities. There are a couple exceptions to that. Tribes have the tribal nation itself has no payment limit. General partnerships and joint ventures may have multiple payment limits depending on the makeup, but generally, you know, most folks that participate with us are going to get that $50,000 payment limit. If you are in a national priority zone, the migratory corridor in Wyoming Northwest, and then the historical Dust Bowl area, they receive an additional $5 per acre payment, and then cost share payments aren't included in that annual payment limit. Again, we already talked about AGI, so I won't get too far into it, but just some more information there. This is a generalized look at how our grassland rental rates are going to be for this year. We are doing very similar to what we did in sign up 205. There will be a $13 minimum rental rate. So all of those light tan counties in the nation either got through our rental rate deliberation calculation, we're below that $13. So we're going to start there. And then it, you know, raises up depending on where we are in the nation. Rental rates are calculated. We look at 75% of the grazing value of the land. We use the National Agricultural Statistics Service survey results on a lot of that, and then do some smoothing, obviously, to get us there. Briefly, I'm going to touch on working lands for wildlife. You know, we started this in Wyoming a couple of years ago, finally kind of got it going last year. What this means is that folks can participate in both Grassland CRP and EQIP. They cannot do the same things in both programs. You can't get a well with us and a well with NRCS, but you can overlay some of those actions. This year, it's being extended out to Montana and Idaho, so there's going to be 3 states. Historically, we've given counties in Wyoming where we started in those migratory corridor counties had a lower threshold to get into the bid process in Grassland CRP. I'm not sure if we're going to do that this year. That decision is still incoming. And then we're also looking at attacking this problem through a couple of other flavors of CRP, both SAFE and CREP. And that is what I have to start us off with.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Patrick. I'm going to give you a brief break and call on Katrina, and then I'm going to come back to both of y'all to talk about the Migratory Big Game Initiative. But Katrina, can you explain to listeners what is expected from a management plan and how the NRCS develops that with the landowner?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for inviting us. It is an exciting program to talk about, and I really hope that several of you either have looked into it, might have contracts, or will look into grasslands, and if it'll work for you and the folks you work with or on your own private lands. NRCS being the technical assistance eyes and ears for CRP, we will go, once an offer is accepted, we will go out on the land and make sure that the species diversity that you signed up for in the ranking is what it is on the land, so we can help with that. And then we visit with you about your goals and objectives. A lot of times if it's got grazing animals on there, it will have to have a grazing management plan. Every state has a little bit different nuances to their grazing management plan. So working with a local person or a partner on that plan is really important to understand what's required. If you're going to manage the land in hay, then we have a haying type plan. And if you're going to manage it for wildlife, that has its own unique wildlife plan. So it's the normal conservation planning process. If you do want to do some of those supporting practices like Patrick talked to you about with fencing and water, then that needs to be in the plan, and some management practices. And we'll create those plan packages that will suit your goals and objectives and also meet the program specific rules. There is some monitoring that has to happen over the life cycle of a 15-year contract to assure that those lands are being managed according to their conservation plan. Like Patrick said, there are some opportunities in Wyoming to have EQIP assist with some of those practices instead of paying for them through the Grassland CRP, but we're going to work on a one-by-one basis. It's a pilot type project to see how those two programs could work together. And we're pretty new into grasslands. I think our first signups were in 2016 or so, so we're not dealing with any type of re-enrollments yet. We'll have to tackle that later on down the line, but I really think that engaging with NRCS or TSP to help in the conservation planning part of grasslands is really important, and we really look forward to engaging folks in the planning. And a lot of these acres are in certain states, so that there's a higher demand for a lot of the grassland programs in certain states. So I'll leave it pretty brief, just because I know planning is kind of different from grazing plan to grazing plan, but happy to chime in with the discussion.
Perfect, thank you. And I'll have Patrick come back on and have you both talk a little bit about the USDA big game or migratory big game initiative and what's special about that in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming.
Sure. So it's the only place we're doing this. That's, I think, the most special part. But as mentioned in my slides, from an FSA perspective, the things that we are doing here that are different are allowing folks to utilize both programs. Historically, both agencies have had prohibitions on receiving cost share out of another federal program, even if the actions on the same land, even if the actions had different objectives. In Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho, we are jumping into the deep end of the pool in order to allow participants to leverage both sides of the shop in order to meet the goals in both the migratory game corridors and then in the larger working lands for wildlife framework. And from an administrative side of things, we haven't restricted it down to just that corridor. So for example, it is the entire state of Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana, not just those priority areas. For us, logistically, we couldn't really lock it down further than that. And this is an ongoing conversation. We started offering this with Grassland Signup 205. We are expanding it in 206. I wouldn't be surprised if we are doing, more flexibilities as we move forward.
Yeah, I would just add, I think it is a unique opportunity to take advantage of the two programs. There are things in EQIP that you can't do in CRP, and it's important to have the conservation planner and the producer understand what that might look like on their operation and to be able to leverage that. And I know that getting these large blocks of grazing land, rangeland, probably mostly, into a 15-year contract, and so the risk of development is not there. Plus, working on some of those objectives of that big game corridor. I know fencing is one of the things that are being looked at, like the is it the virtual fence? That's really pretty interesting. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there moving forward with that effort.
And I will say too, I mentioned this very briefly, but we are also looking at expanding this past Grassland CRP to include either our partnership program CREP or looking at state acres for wildlife enhancement offshoot as well. So even though today this is how we're tackling this initiative, like I said, that might expand out as we move forward.
Great. Thank you both for that information. I know that WA is really excited for the expansion of the pilot. Me personally, because it's coming to Idaho and that's my territory. And it was here last year as well, but the ability to not only receive Grassland CRP payments, but then also receive funding from EQIP to do different projects on the landscape is something that is really important for producers. So we're excited to have that on the ground. And thank you both for being here. And I'm sure there'll be more questions for you both as we continue. But for now, I'm going to pass the questions along to Chris Robinson. Are you there, Chris? Oh, there he is. Perfect.
I am indeed. Thank you, Lane.
Yeah. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about your ranch in Carbon County, Wyoming, and your experience in Grassland CRP?
Sure. Well, about in December of 2021, we bought a ranch in Carbon County. We were looking for a place to run yearlings in the summer. We have cow-calf operations in Utah and in western Wyoming, southeastern Idaho. We wanted a yearling grass place, and so we bought this ranch. And our general plan when we go into a new area, we'd been operating in Uintah County, which is far western edge of the state of Wyoming. When we go into a new area, we like to get to know the game and fish people, and we were really surprised at the amount of wildlife we have on this ranch. I mean, some of in some places on this ranch, the dominant species is not sagebrush, but bitterbrush. And it's just mule deer popping up like jackrabbits all over, and tons of antelope, a lot of sage grouse, a lot of elk. And so anyway, we grazed the ranch, and the more we were on it, the more we liked it. And then I get a random email from this woman named Shaylee Harrison, Western Landowner Alliance. And I don't even know how I got on the list, but I tend to read my email for some strange reason. And I was really intrigued. And one of the emails that I received was talking about this partnership, which I think Patrick has alluded to, between Wyoming Game and Fish and USDA FSA on this Grassland CRP in priority areas for big game. And so I was immediately thought, well, geez, this is exactly what we need. Now, we had the ranch had been used as a cow-calf operation, and prior to that as a sheep operation. And the stock water development, whenever we go on a ranch, the stock water is like the first thing that we try to look into. Do we have enough stock water? Because no matter how much forage you have, it's not available if it's not within proximity of stock water. So we started to work with the NRCS and the FSA. And by the way, Katrina and Patrick, your counterparts in Carbon County are fantastic people who really provide great customer service and are very helpful. And so a shout out to them. But we started to work with them and design, we were working on a stock water pipeline system that would distribute water over more of the land. And then we got to a little bit of a hang up where we were told for a time that we had to choose between Grassland CRP, into which we had been accepted, but we still had a chance to renounce our acceptance, and EQIP. And then there was the notion of the cost sharing, and it was a really great thing when we heard that so-called stacking of EQIP and Grassland CRP could occur because the practices that we want to implement with EQIP are right in line with helping for livestock and wildlife watering, and also better rangeland care, but better grazing. And so in any event, we're very excited to be enrolled in Grassland CRP, and our EQIP application was accepted. And so we kind of have the best of both worlds. And I want to give a shout out again to Patrick's comment of, it's not doubling up, because we're not receiving cost share on the same practices. So far, we're not asking for any cost share under Grassland CRP, but the ability to use EQIP and all of its tools with Grassland CRP is a real blessing. And we're really excited to be developing the additional stock water. And of course, we have a conservation plan and good grazing practices and other management practices that we need to employ, which we want to do anyway. So these programs are totally in keeping with our values, and we're very grateful that we stumbled on them through Shaley.
Thank you, Chris. I'm gonna ask Matthew the same question, and then I'm gonna put you back on the spot again after he answers this one. But Matthew, you're here with us too? There he is. Perfect. Can you tell us a bit about your ranch in California and your experience in Grassland CRP, noting the uniqueness of your operation as the land tenant opposed to the landowner?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said in the intro, my wife Riley and I own and operate Keystone Land and Livestock, which we started in 2022, so relatively recently. And we've got a small direct market grass finished beef operation, but primarily we're a custom grazing operation. So we work with a handful of producers in Northern California and Oregon to care for their cattle during the winter grazing season. And we also operate entirely on land we lease. Much of it we lease from my in-laws and my wife's extended family, and some from neighbors. But this adds some complexity for us participating in programs like Grassland CRP. And there's a couple things that basically enabled us to participate in these programs. The first one was just the on the ground management of the ranch. So when we took it over, it was managed sort of a conventional set stock approach. So the cattle were brought in, same number of cattle, same time of year, every year, taken out same time of year, kind of regardless of variation in precipitation or just, conditions on the ground. And the ranch was basically treated as one large pasture. So they had access to everything at any given time that they were there. So when we came on in collaboration with the landowners, we built and repaired a whole bunch of fence, enough to divide the ranch into 9 separate pastures that we rotate our cattle through. And also have installed a pretty extensive water system that provides 30,000 gallons of storage and a trough for each of our pastures and a bunch of buried pipeline to connect them. So through these infrastructure improvements, we've been able to change our management and set up and stick to a sort of adaptive grazing plan. And because of that, we're able to comply with these RDM requirements, which is the primary metric that the NRCS is using to assess our compliance with the program. So that's kind of the on the ground component. And then in terms of compliance on a more like on a paperwork level, I guess you could say, what's made it feasible is that from the onset, we explicitly include in our leases a clause that gives us permission to participate in and benefit financially from conservation programs and ecosystem services markets. So that's kind of the part of the initial conversation we have with landowners. And we sort of frame it and look at it as a way to justify the increased labor and management costs that are inherent in doing this adaptive rotational grazing program. So we had that sort of agreed upon from the outset. So when we came to them with this program, it sort of fit squarely into that pre-existing agreement. The other hurdle we had to figure out was that we had a 5-year lease, so we needed to extend it because the minimum contract term was 10 years for participation. And again, we just went to the landowner and said, hey, we'd like to extend the lease so we can participate in this program. And they agreed to it on the condition that they had the capacity to renegotiate elements of that lease partway through that term. So with those sort of things in place, we were set up, I guess, to participate in the program, even though we did not own the land or most of the cattle.
Thank you, Matthew. And then Chris, I'm going to have you come back on and I'm going to present this question to both of you. Could you talk about any challenges or benefits that you received that you haven't mentioned thus far? And then what can you tell other landowners about what is most pertinent to their operations when enrolling?
I mentioned to you that the main challenge we had was trying to stack equip, and that was very artfully handled, and the resolution was very favorable from our point of view. The second question, Lane, was the benefits. What we've asked that part again.
Absolutely. So any challenges or benefits, and then what would you tell other landowners about what is most pertinent to their operations when enrolling?
Well, if you're as a landowner, which we're grazers, we want to harvest rainfall and sunshine, and we do farm as what we call a necessary evil. We have been involved with traditional CRP, not having lands enrolled ourselves, but we have followed and been able to purchase lands that were former CRP. But it was always sort of a disappointment to us that now that we wanted to leave it in grassland, that there was no way, that there weren't these incentives like the Grassland CRP offers. So for a working landscape, and I'm appreciative of all the different programs that USDA offers, but this has got to be one of the best, I think, that allows us grazers on working landscapes to have the incentives to do well, and we already feel them, but this helps. It's a difficult business. The rents from the CRP enrollment, the Grassland CRP, really help us, and the cost sharing or allowing equip stacking really helps us. So I think it fits. It's a great program for a grazing operation. It allows you the flexibility. When we've dealt with traditional CRP, and we never owned it, but we had neighbors, and when there was drought, there would be a emergency haying and grazing, usually occurring after maybe August 1st or August 31st, and we were grateful for that because we were burned up elsewhere, and to be able to go onto those traditional CRP lands as a safety valve and with the consent of the owners was really appreciated. But I think it's a great program. I'm maybe repeating myself, so I'll stop.
Matthew, do you have anything to add from there?
Yeah, I could talk for a sec about kind of the application process, because it was a little challenging. There were some headaches in getting us across the finish line and enrolled in the program. I think some of them might have been maybe unique to our context, but when we first inquired about the program with our local office, they were going through some personnel changes. So someone had left, and we were dealing with an interim director from another county who was pretty unfamiliar with the program, as was kind of everyone else at the office. So we got we didn't get complete information, I guess, about the enrollment process and how it worked and how the rankings worked. And if we were in fact eligible, there was some confusion around that. And one of the things that was really fantastic was I reached out to Shalise at WLA And she was able to, over the course of a number of sort of phone calls and just provide a lot of support in sussing out and explaining all of the parameters and dynamics of the program, especially sort of the ranking system. So one of the things she was able to do was let us know, okay, the ranking, what would the term be? The ranking cap or the ranking number that you had to surpass last year. I think it was like 70 points. So we said, okay, great. Let's aim for at least 80 points with our application to ensure that we're going to get accepted. And then we could look at the application, and for example, we decided to take a decreased payment rate on our per acre rate of payment as a way to boost that application. And we had a couple other things that helped us. I think we were beginning farmers and ranchers, which gave us an advantage, gave us some more points. We were in a threatened area in terms of development. I think it was the most threatened county in California based on the map they had. So between those various things, we were able to get our application ranking up to a point that we were accepted. And then there was kind of another little saga where everything was going well, and about a week before the application was supposed to be submitted, the local office and folks we were working with kind of went radio silent, and we weren't able to get in touch with them. And I was trying to reaching out saying, hey, has our application gotten submitted? Just want to make sure it's in. And finally got a response the day before it was due saying, yes, it's been submitted. And here's a copy of the various components of the application. And I reviewed them, and there was a number of errors basically on the application around acreage. They had included some acreage that was in fact under tree cover that wasn't supposed to be included. I think one of the tract numbers was wrong. There were, I think the payment rate was incorrect. There was a couple of things that had just not been done correctly. And again, I wasn't able to get in touch with the folks I'd been working with for whatever reason. I think one of them was out of the office the next day. And again, I reached out to Shalise, and she put me in touch with the state expert, I guess, the state administrator of the CRP program, who spent 2 or 3 hours with me on the phone getting that application corrected and getting it in. I think 30 minutes before the deadline. It was like really down to the wire. So I guess I share that to say that it was challenging to get it done, and I think that might have been a distinct representation of just our unique circumstances. But I think it emphasizes the need to really be informed about the program and be an active participant in the application process. There's a lot of great programs out there, and I think this Grassland CRP program is one of the best. We're really excited about being a part of it, and it's going to have a big impact on us in terms of the financial viability of our operation. But it might be a little bit of a crapshoot how familiar your local office is with that program. So I think it just pays to be as informed as possible, to get things in promptly, so you have a chance to rectify any mistakes and just double check everyone's work to make sure that it's matching what it should be. And working, or Western Landowners Alliance is just a phenomenal resource. We wouldn't be enrolled in the program if it wasn't for the support and help we've gotten from you guys. So we're really grateful for that.
Let me just echo that last statement of Matthew's. We would not be in the program if it weren't for Western Landowners Alliance. Full stop. Thank you, Shaylee and company.
Well, we really appreciate those kind words. This is not a WLA. We didn't make them say that. They're saying that on their I appreciate
that
y'all
was
being
part
here.
of my script. I must have missed that part.
It's very nice of y'all. I'll have everyone come back on camera. I'm going to open it up to questions. We've received some in the chat. And first, I want to also thank Matthew and Chris for jumping onto and answering those questions. It's always really nice to hear from landowners and get insight from y'all, especially from other landowners who are considering participating in these programs. So, but from there, I have some questions. And the first couple ones are geared more towards Patrick and Katrina, but I'm sure other ones will come along as we're chatting. And we do only have 10, maybe a little bit less than 10 minutes. And so for those of you that don't, or that have questions that don't get answered, we will be following up via email, and anything that doesn't get answered, we'll make sure that we provide information after the fact. But first, I'm going to start off with a question or some questions that are geared towards management plans. And so there are two that have stood out, but I think both it could be covered under management plans. But the first is, are there specific fencing requirements? And then does NRCS tell you how many animals that you can run as a part of your grazing plan?
Yeah, those are great questions. The grazing plan is an engagement with one of our planners who are knowledgeable in grazing and with the landowner. What are the landowner's objectives, goals and objectives first? And how are you managing now? You know, there's a lot of feed forage balance. There's leased ground, there is ground you might own, there are, you know, different carrying capacities across the different rangeland or pasture units. And so it's a matter of engaging in a lot of on the ground visit, get out in the field, walk the land with the landowner, talk about their goals. And I hope that Matthew and Chris had really good engagement with your NRCS planners, because this is your plan. This is not NRCS's plan. We write it, it has to meet the program requirements, but it really is all about informing you what we find with our feed forage balances. If you're unaware of how much forage you have out there, you know, you got to fluctuate with the weather patterns, drought, fire, all kinds of things. So yeah, and the fencing requirements will be different in different states. So it really is something you need to ask at the state level.
Great, thank you, Katrina. Another question, this might go to probably Patrick, but we'll see who answers. Is there a minimum amount of land that needs to be that they need to have in order to qualify for the program?
No, there is no minimum. The maximum, you are more than welcome to offer more land than we will pay you. Not exactly sure why you would do that, but you could.
Perfect. And another one for you. Do you have to have legal access to the land? So one of the viewers has a railroad. They have railroad land. I'm not wording this correctly, but they have a usage agreement with the railroad. And do they have to have legal access to the land?
Depending on the ownership structure of that land, maybe not. I would say, I think the overwhelming majority of our contracts are grazing based, you know, mostly cows on the land doing what they do. That is not a requirement. Land can be idle. It can be just managed for wildlife habitat. So, you know, those are other considerations when you put it on. So loosely, no, but it's going to be more difficult to write a plan and do that sort of thing.
Another question for you. This person is currently enrolled in Grassland CRP. Is it possible to add a newly purchased adjacent acreage without an entirely new application or qualification process?
No. So contracts are kind of locked in time, and we do it based on our farm tracts. Theoretically, we want to have one piece of ground per or one contract per tract. Doesn't always happen that way. But if you signed up last year and you have 100 acres and you bought the 100 acres next door, you can offer that and sign up 206, but there wouldn't be a way to slide it into the contract you currently have.
All these questions are coming to you. I'm sorry, but great that you're on to help support in this. So this person has 1 year remaining of an equip contract. Are they eligible for Grassland CRP, or do they need to wait another year?
And I slid up in the chat, and I'm pretty sure that he said he was in Montana. So yes, you would be eligible to offer that land into Grassland CRP. You wouldn't necessarily be able to do. Oh, sorry.
So it's dependent on which state you're in.
Yeah. So folks that have active equip or want to put equip on the land that they're also thinking about doing CRP, they are restricted to Wyoming, Idaho, Montana. No offense to the folks talking that helped me, you know, give the presentation, but California, we're not doing that yet. We might in the future, that sort of thing.
Are nonprofits eligible for this program?
Yes. So sorry about that. Yes, you can participate on the contract, receive payment. We ask a lot less questions about the makeup of nonprofits than we do like an LLC or something like that, just based on entity structure. But yes. I'm not going to turn myself on mute anymore. It doesn't seem to be
No,
doing me
yeah,
any
don't do
good.
it because there's a couple more questions headed your way. So this organization recently downsized and doesn't feed out as much hay as they have historically. Is CRP a good alternative way to boost income in an area where it is tough to sell hay?
Haying on CRP is a lot stickier wicket than grazing. So right now we have what we call the primary nesting season for birds mostly. Haying can't happen during that. As Chris mentioned, there's some actions that we've done with emergency haying and grazing that has to happen, either before or after that primary nesting season. I know in some states that nesting season is really exactly when you want to be cutting hay. I know that's why we're not in CRP on our farm in part. And so, there's going to be some considerations that you're going to have to look at if you want to continue harvesting forage on that ground. But otherwise, as a management tool, CRP is great from both a conservation and a wildlife standpoint. So I would definitely at least kick the tires.
Okay, we have a very short time period left. I know that there's a couple more questions, but I think that they might be best answered with more time and a follow-up. And so is there anything, I guess, opening up to the panelists, is there anything else that you'd like to mention before we head out?
The
Okay.
only thing I'd like to say is to thank NRCS, FSA, and WLA, and any other alphabet acronyms we can come up with. No, those three are enough. For their great work with this program. I think it's a game changer, and so thank you. And thanks to everyone for participating.
Thank you. Yeah, and thanks for everyone participating. I think it was a lot of great information. I'm sure there's a lot of questions that everyone will have following this. And so if you have more questions, feel free to reach out and contact me. My information was on that screen. You'll also get my information in the follow-up communications with the video of the webinar. And Western Landowners Alliance is a 501c3 nonprofit. So if you enjoyed this webinar or you're interested in sustaining whole and healthy lands and supporting producers and in stewardship practices, here's a slide for you that you can consider making a gift of any amount. And so we really appreciate your time and all of the panelists joining today. It's always nice to have producers and our agency staff online to be the people who answer the questions whenever I can't answer them. So I really appreciate all y'all being here, and I look forward to follow-up. So thank y'all.
Thank you.